World first tier 4 Loki. I know it's been a few days already since I tier 4'd him and I'm making the video late, so we're saying world first sounds dumb, but it's still true. You can see the evidence on the stream, and I'll actually be referring to the stream quite a few times in this video to reference the level 70 tier 3 and the level 80 tier 3 Loki testing. So for those of you that are wondering how good he is before tier 4, I don't have a dedicated video on that, but I do have extensive testing done on the live stream, which is there. There's no ads on it, whatever. You can just go and check it out. This is from whatever, 1 day ago, so it's very recently. It's almost 2 days ago. But if you just fast forward through it, you'll see that we did a bunch of testing with Loki, with the old uniform, with the new uniform. We went through and looked at TVA stuff. We went through and looked at his ability to do ABX stuff and not ABL, but ABX stuff. We tested him out in World Boss. Like we did a whole bunch of stuff, right? We did a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah, if you want to see that content, just hit up the live stream there. But essentially, I'll summarize it for you now. But essentially, I do think this uniform is a step up from the TVA and the Loki President uniforms. However, it plays exactly the same as those uniforms, so you're not going to necessarily feel like it's all that much different. But it is quite a bit stronger offensively. Defensively, he also gets an extra 20% damage reduction now on his Storied Trickster passive. Unfortunately, his animations, though, are the biggest L. So I have to talk about this at the beginning here. The animations are really not what we expected when you talk about Storied, God of Stories, etc. If you've seen Loki's episode 6 by now, you know that he takes on a new form and he becomes sort of like a Giga God. And we were kind of expecting that from the animations, and that's not what we see. We do see Sylvie, which is cool. We do see a lot of green stuff, which is also pretty cool. We see a lot of TVA doors, the time doors, which is also cool, don't get me wrong. And we see this third skill basically essentially being recycled. So he really doesn't even get 5 new skills. He gets about 4 new skills, but you can even argue that it's not exactly 4 new skills because 2 and 4 are very similar to their old animations. So it's sort of like 3 new skills. I would call it 3 new skills with the same old tier 3. So that's really the biggest issue though with this uniform, is that the animations are not going to be up to par for some people. Now the animations aren't everything, but I do highlight uniforms where the animations are really good. So now I also have to highlight uniforms where the animations are bad. There's always an opportunity for the devs to later on update this uniform. If you guys don't remember, I'll remind you, back in the days, the glory days of MFF, the end game, the Infinity War days, they updated Captain America, they updated Iron Man to feature the Snap, to feature the Mjolnir. They updated all those bad boys. They even updated Mysterio, believe it or not, to include the Molten Man, Hydro Man attacks that weren't originally there in the Spider-Man Far From Home update. So it's been a long time. It's been like 4 years since they did updated animations, but it is possible. It is still in the realm of possibility. Now, there's one other issue with Loki, and it actually happens at tier 4, so you don't have to worry too much about this if you're not going to tier 4 your Loki. But for those of you that are going to worry about tier 4ing Loki, it is an issue. His tier 4 skill is confusing. So you activate it and you get this sort of like Ultra Instinct glow. It looks really cool, and yeah, that's all good and well. And you get sort of like this ghostly kind of like fart thing that travels behind him. I don't know. You get this kind of like trail. This trail of green energy. However, given the fact that the text reads the way that it does, and given the fact that there's no visual indicator in game, right? As you can see there's just the energy around him. There's no visual indicator for clones or anything like that. But when you read the tier 4 skill, it says there, at the top there, it says activation rate when striker skill is used, right? Increases attack, sure. Create 8 misdirections and uses 1 when hit to increase all attack accumulatively by 5.5% and recover, in this case, 13% HP. And you can go higher for sure, right? Like if we go with Thanos here, then it's going to be 7.5% and 15. But the issue here is twofold. One, there's no visual indicator when you've been hit and a misdirection has been used. There's no visual indicator. That's a big problem for players because they don't know if the tier 4 is actually doing anything or not. The tier 4 has a secondary effect, which is to increase his attack by up to 40%, right? You can see there with Thanos it's 40%, but that's a really lame like tier 4 ability. The majority of the ability is that second thing, and it's really cool and it's really thematic and it really fits Loki, but then there was no effort made for the animation to fit him. That's the first issue. The second issue is that if he has to get hit, it's going to be very hard for this to work at all. So I think the devs need to think very carefully about how they implement these types of abilities, right? Loki is not going to get hit by enemies who are not going to iframe ignore when he's in iframe, right? And you can see there his fourth skill is an iframe, which is where he spends the majority of his time. In his combo is during his fourth skill, right? If you go into the skill preview and you go into the practice combo, you can take a look here that it tells you to do 3, 5, and then 4. So you're spending the majority of your time in an iframe. I question the developers. How are you supposed to get hit when you're in iframe? So that's kind of the issue here. There's a good chance that his tier 4 buff is not actually, like this part of the tier 4 buff is actually not doing anything for him. Because if you're in iframe, you're not getting hit. If you're not getting hit, you're not getting any sort of accumulation. You're not getting a heal either. So, and you're not going to stand there to get hit to accumulate. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's such a stupid way of playing, right? It doesn't make any sense. So I think they need to look at this again and maybe tweak it. Maybe it should just use a misdirection every second if one is not used. Like, automatically one is used up. And maybe there should be some sort of indicator that the misdirections are being used up. Like, maybe the green thing will glow brighter and then it will fade back to the dull green and then it will glow brighter again. Or it flashes or something like that. I hate to introduce more visual noise into a character's kit here. I know that Marvel Future Fight struggles from really bad visual clarity, but this is important because he's very strong, but it also feels like they kind of screwed up his kit a little bit, and that's not really good because it breaks the immersion. And again, you want to feel like you're playing the character, right? And on paper, right, this really feels like you're playing Loki, but then in practice, it doesn't really feel like it because of the issues we just outlined with iframe ignore and things like that, or just always being in iframe, so therefore not getting hit. But yeah, that being said, those are sort of the downsides to the character. At level 70 and level 80, however, I do think he performed well. He performed as well or better than Black Bolt in the same testing, which I think is very good. At tier 4, he seems to be at least as good as Black Bolt. So I don't want to jump to conclusions too quickly with Loki, but my general theory here and sort of my first impression is that he's as good or better than Black Bolt. Now, he's a little bit harder to play than Black Bolt, yes, but he's also not a seasonal uniform, so you can get Loki anytime. So that is very appealing, and I would strongly consider Loki as an alternative to Black Bolt if you don't have Black Bolt, but you want a character like Black Bolt. They're not exactly the same, but they are both male, supervillain, and universal. Right? The only difference between them generally is that he is an alien and Black Bolt is an inhuman. And then, of course, the two abilities for Loki are Chill and Mind, which don't have any world boss stages, whereas the stages for Black Bolt, he has energy projection and fast movement, where he does have stages. Speaking of world boss stages, if we take a look at the tier 4 Giga Guide, Loki is available for 4 stages or fewer for all of the world boss legends. So that puts him at 20 total stages, which is actually under the average number of stage of 22 that current tier 4s inhabit. So that is not very good for his world boss sort of value. I still think he's good for world boss, and in this case, if you compare him to Black Bolt, he's actually better because Black Bolt's only available for 15 different restrictions. And although Black Bolt has much better abilities for world boss because fast movement and energy projection are both used, the problem with Black Bolt is that he's inhuman. So any stages that call, well, there's no stages that call for inhumans, but then any stages that are calling for aliens will fit Loki but won't fit Black Bolt. So inhumans kind of suffer uniquely for that, but yeah, you can consider that for Loki. As far as the rest of his value goes, I actually ranked him at 14, which is very good. It's on par with Luna. It's on par with Magneto. It's actually on par with Black Bolt, who probably needs to be reduced down 1 point or so. And really what it comes down to for Loki is the carrying in ABX and ABL. So he doesn't meet the minimum criteria to be a 3 in World Boss Legend. He's very good for World Boss Legend, but he's not above the average number of stages, so he only gets a 2. And then he only gets a 2 in GBR, and I'll show you why in a minute. For farming, he's actually really good. We tested him versus Thor, and he was about as fast as Thor. So again, if you don't have Thor and you need, like, if you need a universal villain and you also need a farming character, Loki becomes a very attractive option. No PvP value, that's not a surprise there, but it's really the ABX and ABL being super dominant for those two game modes that really carries him. And I'll have content on that in the future showcasing exactly how to play Loki. But for now, I'll give you sort of the rundown. What makes Loki more quirky and for some players more difficult to play is the fact that his 5th skill interacts and has increased number of hits depending on how many enemies you are targeting. And you can see this very clearly from the practice combo. If you just press 5 and you count the number of hits, you'll see that it only registers 45 hits. Now 45 hits is pretty good. So you think with 3 enemies, you'd multiply 45 by 3, which is 135. But now if I go ahead and use the 5th skill on these 3 enemies, you will see that it's not 135, it's actually 263 or 266. So what's going on here? What's going on is that the explosions from each enemy are overlapping. So those 45 hits are being triggered on each enemy, but then they're bleeding over into the enemies near them. And so if you actually divide the 266 hits that we just got, and you divide that by 3, you'll see that was about 88 hits. So he jumps from 45 hits on one single enemy with his 5th skill to 88 hits on 3 enemies. And that's 88 being registered on each enemy. That's very, very good, right? That's almost double the number of hits. And then that gets even crazier. If you line him up with 5 enemies, and I believe 5 is the maximum number of explosions that can sort of overlap and trigger, you'll see that it goes up to a whopping 572. So remember it was 88 hits per? When you divide 572 by 5, you get 114. So he goes from 45 all the way up at the max to 114 hits per. That is a massive increase. So he actually gets 2.5 times the number of hits if you're able to have enough explosions on enough targets. Here it's a little bit misleading because we're actually hitting targets over here. We hit this guy, but it's actually quite crazy. So that's really the quirk that makes Loki so powerful and versatile for game modes where you have multiple enemies. And of course that game mode is ABX and ABL, because you not only have the Frost Beast, you not only have Surtur, but you also have those enemies that summon wave after wave. So it's no surprise here, Loki appears to be, even from very limited, very rushed testing, Loki appears to be one of the best, potentially the best character in the game for ABX and ABL. So that is fantastic, considering that recently characters that are very good for that game mode, Magneto, Luna, Storm, have all been seasonal characters. So it's really, really nice to get a character that's very good for those competitive game modes that have better rewards now, and it's not a seasonal uniform where it's not sort of a paywall type of situation. Versus Dormammu, I want to showcase his rotation and also highlight that one of the better teams for him, possibly the best team, would be Green Goblin lead, and then Morgan Le Fay support. So with his rotation, it's pretty straightforward. You're doing 3 with a delay cancel into 5, and then canceling that immediately into 4. And then you want to have a slight delay on the tier 3 so that it triggers here, and so we can get a little bit of extra damage. Not quite enough to go to the next phase, but that's okay. In general, his tier 3 lasts too long. Like, it has too many hits and it lingers for too long. So I was actually hoping to see them change that in the way that they designed his tier 3, but that's okay. They didn't do that. But there we go. 35 seconds on phase 1, not bad at all. So essentially the rotation for Loki ends up being you instantly cancel 6 as well, because you don't want any of the hits, and I'll show you why here. So here we're incorporating the tier 3, which is fine, but what's going to happen is before the 5th skill is ready, the hits from the tier 3 are actually going to trigger the next rage proc, and you actually don't want that to happen, because then you can't really splash in 1 and 2, you can't take advantage of those hits, and then it kind of screws you up. So that's why a lot of people don't end up using the tier 3 at all, and they end up just instantly canceling it like that. Like I just instantly cancel it into the 1 to get the buffs for it without having it sort of interrupt your gameplay. So keep that in mind about the tier 3 for Loki. You can experiment with using it, but I don't recommend it for situations in which you need to have a tight rotation because of that issue. So there we go, we're in the next phase. This is just a regular rage, by the way. This is not a mighty rage or anything like that. We do have an insight, but that's all. And so we're just going to go ahead and pop that and pop that. Especially for ABX and ABL for Loki, not having any clones, or like not having any enemies around, the little wave enemies, hurts your score a lot, as we demonstrated with the 5th skill. And that's another reason why the tier 3 is instantly canceled rather than being left around to linger, because those hits will just delete all the mobs and you know, screw up your damage, screw up the number of hits, and you want the max number of hits sort of cascading onto the enemy as possible. So this is this is kind of a slow run. I'm not going to lie. Like, I don't think he's the best at GBR in the universal category. He also doesn't have a VPAD skill like Black Bolt. So overall, I think this Loki uniform is a no-brainer for anyone that's heavy into ABX and ABL, but I also think it's a strong recommendation for anyone that can't or won't buy Black Bolt's uniform, Thanos' seasonal uniform, because a lot of these universal villains lately have been seasonals, and it's very frustrating to miss out on them and then have to wait a whole year. And in the meantime, Loki just becomes a better option, frankly, a more attractive option than Thanos as a universal alien for any PvE content, so he already has him beat there, but then also as good, if not better than Black Bolt for a lot of that similar content, with basically GBR being the big outlier between the two of them, mostly chalked up to Black Bolt's extra pierce and final damage on the tier 4, as well as the VPAD allowing him to dodge damage. But yeah, I think Loki's great. I think the biggest drawback right now to him is the tier 4 skill not really working well, and then the animations just not really being up to par with what we expect from Marvel Future Fight, especially given how cool the visuals were at the end of Loki Season 2. However, I think all of these issues are ones that they can remedy pretty easily with a patch in the next couple of days or weeks. So I'm hopeful that they will do that. But yeah, hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.